Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. A Christchurch woman told friends she was dying of cancer. They grieved and gave thousands to help her, but then the unthinkable happened. It was all a farce. Nicola Flint is accused of forging medical letters and defrauding a rugby club of more than $100,000. Today on The Front Page, senior crime reporter and host of A Moment in Crime, Leask, has been diving into this case with a special two-part series on Flint's diagnosis deception. She joins us now. First off, Anna, let's set the scene. How did this start?
So Nicola Flint told friends that she had been diagnosed with cancer. And, this is a really good friend. She's telling her best friends that she's found this lump in her breast and she's had it tested and it is cancer. And then over the next 7 years, that lie grew and grew and grew. And everyone believed that she had stage 4 terminal cancer, that, she was about to leave 2 children without a mum, that they were helping her plan her funeral and where her ashes would be scattered and, doing things for her kids and planning on how they would help look after the kids. There was just this web of lies that she was telling different friends different things about her treatment and, different explanations for why she wasn't having chemo and she was having this and that, and it just, these were her best friends and nobody really thought to question her on it. She told her children she was dying. She was helping them get ready for when mummy wasn't there. So they were like, well, you wouldn't do that if you weren't really, really sick. And she just sucked so many people in with this absolute fantasy of, having cancer. And we now know, and the police have said very openly, that there is no evidence Nicola Flint has ever been diagnosed with cancer.
Isn't that incredible? Imagine your friend coming up to you. First and foremost, there are a lot of people out there who have had a friend or a loved one come up to them and say, and have that conversation and say that they have cancer, and have those real life talks as well. Those friends would have felt completely and utterly dumbfounded when they found out. When did it start to unravel for her?
In 2024, it all started to unravel when she was investigated for a lot of money going missing from a football club where she was working. And, that sort of came out and she was charged with taking, I think, $100,000 from the football club. And she, was saying to the friends, it's not what it looks like, I'm innocent. But at the same time, she fled the country. She went to the UK. The friends were still, at that point, no question that this poor woman, she's so sick and now she's got this and, and then a friend had found some letters that Nicola had given her from a cancer specialist, here's the latest update on my condition. And the friend went, what if she doesn't have cancer? Let's go back to those letters and just see what's what. And she was reading through this letter and she's like, I don't think this is real. I think this has been copy and pasted and the signature didn't look right and the letterhead looked funny. So that letter eventually was obtained by the police, and they checked up, and these cancer doctors whose signatures were on these letters were like, that's not me, I didn't write that, that's not my medical opinion. And as I said, police were able to publicly say there's no evidence Nicola Flint ever was diagnosed with cancer. By then she'd told people early on that she had cervical cancer, and then it's back and it's breast cancer. And she was telling people who, one of her friends who I spoke to, she'd lost her mum to cancer when she was a tiny, tiny child. So she'd grown up without a mum. And, she said to me, I know the hole that cancer leaves. And I was never going to question a friend. I just wanted to support her. There was another friend whose husband had died, and Nicola had supported her through her husband dying from cancer. So, and as I said, her children were told they were being prepared for when mum's not here. She taught her daughter how to braid her own hair for when I'm gone, then you can do it yourself. So when the police dropped this bombshell that there's no evidence of this woman ever having cancer, everyone sort of just went, wow. And the friends started to effectively compare notes and realise they'd all been absolutely lied to and scammed, for lack of a better word. But they've all told me that Nicola had a way of keeping them separate. It was a bit of a divide and conquer. She would tell them things about each other to make them wary of each other, to make them cautious. She'd say things like, oh, well, have you heard this? Chelsea's been saying this about you, but don't tell her I told you this, or don't tell such and such about my latest diagnosis. So all these friends were sort of pushed apart and kept apart. So, they weren't talking amongst each other about Nicola. So where there were red flags, they sort of felt guilty for thinking that up until police came out and said, well, there is no cancer.
And it's interesting as well, people might listen to this and think, how could they not have known, right? And everybody does, and that's completely normal. But when you've got that trusting relationship with your friend, you're being told all of these different things and you're given evidence, it seems, or lack thereof a better word, would you question your friend?
And this is the thing. These women that I've spoken to were her good friends. They considered her family. Their kids thought they were their second mums, and there was no question. Your friend comes to you and says, "Shit, I've got cancer," and you don't question that. You go
you'd
immediately
be an idiot to say, really, do you?
Can I please have some evidence?
Let's see all of the stuff.
Yeah, but then she did have these letters that backed it up, and she would turn up to things and she would have a plaster on her arm because she'd had this treatment, or she would be dropped off at places, or she'd be booked in for things, and people were like, well, she's definitely having treatment, but no, none of it was true.
So what has she officially been charged with?
So she's facing around 9 charges in the Christchurch District Court. The majority of those are for the theft and basically the misappropriation of funds from this football club. But there is also a number of charges for forging documents, and these are the cancer specialist letters. And the charge is worded that she forged the documents with intent to have people believe she had cancer, and in some cases to obtain financial advantage. It is alleged that she used one of the cancer letters to medically retire from ANZ Bank, where she'd worked for many years. They paid her $84,000 in a medical retirement package because she had terminal cancer. And so she's charged with fraudulently providing them that letter in order to get that money. So I think the total of the money that she's accused of stealing is $180,000+.
I genuinely thought that she had cancer. She would go into great detail about some of the symptoms that she was experiencing, and they were horrific. Treatments she was having, occasionally there would be a Band-Aid on her forearm because she was having treatment. Occasionally you'd think, oh my gosh, really? What? And I remember asking her, are you going to have chemotherapy? And I was told that the type of cancer she had didn't react to chemotherapy. And, this went on for years, like 5, 6, 7.
And you mentioned as well, you've spoken to her friends. When speaking to them, how did they come across? Were they angry? I mean, I suppose that they're going through all of these stages of grief, right?
I mean, they've been grieving her for years. They had, her best friend came out from the UK, and Nicola took her up to Mapua, the top of the South Island, and they sat, and she said, this is where my ashes will be scattered. So Emma was grieving her for years, and every time she left New Zealand, she was like, it's the last time I'm going to see my childhood best friend, and she was racked with guilt and always so worried about the kids. And then, when all this came out, she just was so angry, and a lot of them were bewildered. And a lot of them have spoken about, they had these moments where they sort of think of Nicola and they think, oh, that poor woman, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
And so, some of them have had to retrain the way they think about it, because they go to this place of grief and upset when they think about Nicola, and then they're like, hang on, none of it was true. Some of them still have moments where they think, but what if it was? And then they just remember that police officer on national television saying there is no evidence Nicola Flint was ever diagnosed with cancer. They're angry and they're hurt. They just feel really betrayed. Some of them, paid for things. One friend said that every time she did something with Nicola, she would pay for dinners, lunches, just to make sure that Nicola was spending her money on cancer treatment. Her friend in the UK, the best friend from childhood, her parents gave something like £30,000 because Nicola had said she didn't have money to pay for a cancer top-up, which meant she could have unlimited treatment in New Zealand. And so when Emma told her parents this, the parents went straight and transferred the money to New Zealand. So, that's a lot of money that was given to her for cancer treatment for a disease she just did not have. So her friends feel ripped off and they feel foolish. They know that it's not their fault, and they know that they were, they've said they were groomed, and they've talked about how manipulative she was, how devious and how clever. Keeping them all apart and keeping the stories separate and making sure that they weren't talking to each other, just to keep up this web of lies is how they've described it.
And you can imagine as well, people, and that's no fault of their own at all, because I can imagine a situation where if I ever, touch wood, got cancer, my best friend's parents would chip in as well. It's a completely normal thing to do when you love someone and you're really close to someone.
You do anything. You would do anything you can. I mean, cancer is a cruel and hideous disease, and if someone that you're close to is diagnosed, then you want to move heaven and earth to make sure that you can do everything you can to lighten their load. And that's what these friends were doing. And they're just so, shocked, outraged that they were just taken for such a ride.
And you've spoken to some family members as well, hey, her husband's?
So I've spoken to her husband's sister and another member of the family who are just appalled. They had fallen out with Nicola before this cancer diagnosis over other lies, they say, that were told. And just when they heard about the cancer, they were reaching out and trying to do what they could, but they were suspicious. They've never found her to be an honest person, but they never thought it would get this bad. They say that she would say things like, she grew up in a house like Downton Abbey, and she was banker of the year in Bermuda where she'd been working, and there was just story after story, and they would just think, well, most of the time she's pretty normal, so these weird stories, it's just Nicola, but they're just disgusted in what she's done. They're really upset. Nicola's fled the country with her husband and kids. They just haven't had contact with the kids, and they just want the kids to know how much they're loved and missed by their family in New Zealand. They want Nicola's husband Andrew to know how much they're loved and missed, and I think that they've lost a lot more than just a friend. They've lost contact with people that they really, really love, and they're pretty angry because they feel that that's Nicola has manipulated their family away from them.
And you mentioned, obviously, she fled to the UK. Do we have any idea where they are now?
We believe they're in Wales. She has family living in Wales. When they first went to the UK, she moved in with her best friend, Emma, and stayed with her for a while, still maintaining she was having cancer treatment and that sort of thing. And then they fell out, and Nicola and Andrew and the kids went to Wales, and then that's the last Emma's had contact with them. So we don't know exactly where they are. I've reached out to Nicola and Andrew a number of times, asking them to get in touch, giving both of them the opportunity to have a chat about what's gone on. If Nicola can't talk about what's happening with the charges in court, then can she explain the cancer diagnosis? Can she explain the unexplainable, really? Can she tell people why she's told these stories? And there's just been no contact at all.
So what is the likelihood that she will ever come back to New Zealand and face these charges in Christchurch?
So the people that know her the best say she'll never come back. Why would she? There is a warrant out for her arrest. So as soon as she comes back to New Zealand, she will get arrested. But police have said they won't extradite. Obviously, that's a long, lengthy and costly process. And it's just not something they're going to look at for this at this stage. So I don't, based on what the people that know her the best have said, I don't think she'll come back, which means, as her friends say, they feel she's gotten away with it. They would like her to come back and answer the charges and, face up to what she's done, allegedly, but they said there's no reason for her to come back. So
thanks for joining us, Anna.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.